Hi, this is Jason with Alexandria Technical and Community College. Today we're going to talk about a pre-trip inspection on a Class A vehicle. Before we get started with that, I want you to know that we're Alexandria Tech in Alexandria, Minnesota. What we're going to talk about is specific to Minnesota. Your state might differ just a little bit, and that there's no problem with that. We're going to be very thorough in our pre-trip. Just be sure that you're familiar with your state and your exam stations. Alexandria Tech, we rank number 1 in Minnesota for community colleges. We rank number 8th nationally. Many of our programs are in the top 5 nationally. We have an excellent program, including our truck driving program. Please like, share, and subscribe to see more videos. With our pre-trip inspection, I want you to know that we're going to get rid of the words in our vocabulary like good and okay. We're going to use words that are descriptive, like not cracked, bent, or broken, securely mounted, not bulging, not rusted. So if I have a component like a mirror, what I'm going to do is instead of saying my mirror is good, I'm going to say my mirror is mounted secure. It's not cracked, bent, or broken, and it's adjusted properly. Those words are much more descriptive when you're doing your exam, and that's the words we're going to use. So with that being said, I've got a sheet right here. You're going to have one very similar to this probably for your state. And with our sheet, I've labeled it for you already. This section is a Class B vehicle, this section is a Class B vehicle, and of course we're doing ours on a Class A. This stuff pertains to a Class A. And then you've got these columns right here. I labeled them A, B, and C. On these columns, you're always going to do column C, every time. You might get column A, and you might get column B. You might be lucky and get columns A, B, and C. What generally happens is you'll have column A and column C, or column B and column C. We're going to go through every one of these components. All right, here we go. Okay, starting with column A, the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at the truck. I want to ensure there's no damage. I'm going to look underneath the truck. I want to ensure there's no leaking. I also want to take a look at the truck and make sure it's not leaning from one side to the other. After that, I'll start my inspection of the mirrors. I'm going to take a look at my mirrors. They need to be securely mounted. They need to be not cracked, bent, or missing, and they need to be properly adjusted. Also, while we're in this area, I've got an inspection sticker right here. This is a DOT inspection sticker. That needs to be current to the month and year. I also am going to do my lights at this point. I need to state that my lights are securely mounted. They are not cracked, broke, or missing. I need to name my lights by what they are and the color they are. So these are my headlights. They'll be clear or white. On top of the cab, I've got my clearance lights. They need to be amber. I've got marker lights running down the side of the truck. These will be amber marker lights. I've got another amber marker light here, and again, all of these are going to be clean and they need to be not cracked, broke, or missing. I'll point out my marker lights on top of the trailer as I work my way down. Oh, let me back up. My inspection sticker right here for the trailer, also current to month and year. As I work my way to the back of the tractor, I'll point out my taillights on the tractor. My taillights need to be red in color. They need to be clean, not cracked, broke, or missing. I've got a marker light on the side of the trailer here. The marker light, this one doubles as a blinker. This needs to be, again, amber. It needs to be clean and not cracked, broke, or missing. Towards the end of the trailer, I've got another marker light. This is the end of the trailer, so this will be red in color. It needs to be clean, not cracked, broke, or missing. At the end of the trailer, I will have clearance lights on top of the trailer, and then I will have my marker lights on the bottom. These need to be red in color. They need to be clean and not cracked, broke, or missing. And now, I'm not going to do the entire walk around, but I want you to understand that we would do a full 360-degree inspection of our lights. We would also do our blinkers, brakes, and four-ways at this time. Before we get too in depth with our pre-trip and underneath the hood of this motor, I want to explain a couple things to you. So you all are familiar with, if I have a Ford pickup, then that pickup came with a Ford motor. Same thing if I buy a Chevy. If I buy a Chevy pickup, that came with a Chevy motor. Big trucks are not the same as that, okay? This is a Peterbilt. This Peterbilt has a Cummins motor, and if you look around in the background here, you can see other trucks. This is our inside of our shop. We've got 13 trucks. And I want to take you around to a couple different trucks, okay? Because trucks can have different motors. I can have a Peterbilt with a Cummins, I can have a Peterbilt with a Cat, I can have a Peterbilt with a Detroit, I can have a Freightliner with those three options, I can have a Kenworth with those options. Pack car is now another motor option that I can put in. So we've got many options of trucks and motors and transmission combinations that I can put in here. So in this instance, the truck we're going to be working on has got a Cummins motor. Let's go take a look at a couple different trucks. We came to another Peterbilt in our shop here. The truck that we're doing our actual pre-trip on is this truck right here that you can see the side of. This one right here is another Peterbilt. You can see this motor is yellow. This is a Caterpillar motor, and again, this one is in a Peterbilt. We have many trucks in our fleet. I have several different Freightliners, Kenworths, Peterbilts, and a Mack. This is another Peterbilt, so the one we're doing our pre-trip on officially is the Cummins motor, the red one that we saw first. This one has got kind of a green color to it. This is a Detroit motor. And again, those three trucks, all Peterbilts, all three of them with different motors. Still on column A, we've got the oil level to check, and that'll be the other side of the motor. We've got power steering level and components to check, and those things will also be on the other side of the motor. What I wanted to do were the things that were on this side of the motor, so I only have to come over here one time, then I can finish up around the other side of the truck. Now, I know that I've got tires on both sides of the truck, and I've got rims on both sides of the truck, and frame rail, and shock, and spring. I've got all that on the other side of the truck, so we're not going to skip it, but in an effort to save a little time, we're going to do it all at once on the other side. On this side of this truck, we have the first component, which is a water pump, and it's right here behind the frame rail. So right here, behind the frame rail, is our water pump. Now this water pump is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, missing, or leaking. And in our case, this is a belt-driven pump. So I'm gonna need to check my belt for 3/4 of an inch of play or less. Some of these pumps are, in fact, gear-driven. You'll need to identify that. If you are unfamiliar with motors and you don't know how to find a water pump, here's how you can find the water pump. I start with here's the reservoir, and I can see the fluid in there. That goes to the radiator, and right behind the frame right here is a hose. And I can follow that hose up, and it goes to my water pump. The water is going to circulate through the motor. It'll come back out through this top hose and come back into the radiator. So that's how I can find the actual pump. Now, while we're talking about hoses, let me bring up that our hoses are behind here, right? They're securely mounted, not cracked, cut, bulging, or leaking. The next component we're going to look at is the alternator. So here's our alternator, and similar to the water pump, it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or missing. An alternator has wires. I need to mention the wires. They're not loose, cracked, cut, broken, burnt, or corroded. Alternator is also belt driven. I need to check our belt for 3/4 of an inch play or less. Another component that we have on this side of this motor is the coolant reservoir. Now this particular reservoir, this is a newer truck, so this is a clear reservoir. You can see the coolant in here, and if you look carefully, there's a line right here, and that will say maximum level. These can sometimes be located in the same exact spot, only it'll be black metal reservoir, you'll need to actually take the cap off and look in there if your engine's cool. Also, you can have these reservoirs, might be a smaller round reservoir mounted to the firewall and have a sight glass in it. And we are going to actually show you one of those small round ones with a sight glass. And that will be all the components on this side of the truck. Okay, so now we're with a different truck and a different motor, and this now is our reservoir, and you would check this by looking in the sight glass. Sometimes you can see the liquid in there, you should be able to. If you can't, you can simply rock the truck back and forth and you'll see the fluid start to move around in there. We're going to talk about a few things on the driver's side of the motor here. One of the things we're going to start with here, this is my oil level dipstick. All I need to do to check this is pull it out, wipe it off, put it back in, pull it out again, and read the level. It needs to be between the add and full mark in order to be correct. So this is for oil level. This big hunk of it's all red, so it's hard to tell, but right where this is metal, where the paint has come off, this is my air compressor. So when I talk about the air compressor, I'm going to say it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, missing, or leaking. From the air compressor, I can talk about this reservoir right here. This is my power steering fluid reservoir. You'll see where it's got full and add, and there's one for cold and one for hot, although it's hard to read on our reservoir, but full and add. Full and add. From the power steering fluid reservoir, there's a hose that leads behind here and to the back side of my air compressor. This is actually a gear driven pump. This is my power steering pump. If I trace the hoses from the pump, they're going to come out and down to here, which is this big box. Okay, this big box is my steering gear box. It is just like the air compressor. We can use the same words: securely mounted, not cracked, bent, missing, or leaking. From the steering gear box, I've got this piece right here. I've also got this piece right here. So let's talk about this one first. This long shaft is my steering shaft, and I'm going to ensure that it has less than 10 degrees play in it. This piece here, right here, this is called my pitman arm. The pitman arm is connected to this, which is called a draglink, and they are connected right here with a castle nut and a cotter pin. They call this a castle nut because it in fact looks like a castle, and you can see the cotter pin coming through. Okay, so pitman arm, drag link, and at the other side of the drag link, this piece right here is called a spindle, also connected with a castle nut and a cotter pin. Okay, while we're in this area, we're also going to point out this long rod looking thing. It goes from one side of the truck to the other, and this is called a tie rod. It ties my two tires together, and there's a tie rod end right here, and I want to make sure that's not missing and securely fastened. And these are my steering components. The next part with our pre-trip here, we're going to talk about some tires, rims, lug nuts, and our oil seal. I like to do this from the inside and then work my way outside. So I've got my flashlight with, and on the inside, I'm going to look and make sure that my hub oil seal, which is behind here, isn't leaking. And I don't see any. If it were leaking, I could see that very easily. There would be oil everywhere. We're going to come back and do the brakes. So right now I want to talk about the rim right here, right? This rim is not cracked, bent, broken, missing, warped, and on a rim I have to say there's no illegal welds. From the rim I can come right up here to the tire, and I'll start with the sidewall, and the sidewall is not bulged, cracked, cut, and I go over from there to the face of the tire. On the face of the tire, same thing, not cracked, cut, or bulging, and there's no foreign objects. This is called a steer tire, and a steer tire has to be 4/32 or more tread depth. We call this a steer tire because it steers the trucks. On the back of the truck, you know there's 8 tires back there. Those are called drive tires. They're a little different than a steer. So steer tires need to be matching from side to side. So they'll be the same size tire, and they cannot be recapped. So this is the face of the tire. Again, 4/32. I'll go to this sidewall, and again, not cracked, cut, bulging. Okay, and then the outside of the rim, and a rim again, not cracked, bent, broken, missing, warped, and no illegal welds. I'm also going to mention the valve stem here, and that I have a valve stem cap, and it's on there properly. I've got lug nuts. Okay, I'm going to check to make sure that they're all present. They're securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, missing, loose, or rusted. If they were rusted, you would be able to see a rust streak running down from the lug nut. The shiny chrome here is just a cap. If I got water behind the lug nut, the actual lug nut, it would run down on a rust streak on my rim. From here, I've got the outside of my hub oil seal. The cap is present and it's not leaking. Okay, with our suspension components, we're going to start here with this big hunk of iron right here, and this big hunk of iron back here. These are our spring mounts, okay? They're connected to the leaf spring, this big spring right here. So, the mounts themselves, they're securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. They are connected to the leaf spring. The leaf spring's got the very same terminology. Not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. The leaves are not missing, and the leaves are not fanned out. Now, the leaves are connected to the front axle by these U-bolts right here. U-bolts are securely mounted and not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. See, same terminology. This long thing right here is our shock. Okay, the shock is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing, and since it's filled with oil, it's also not leaking or rusted. And behind this bolt right here, you can't hardly see it, but right in here at the bottom, and then again up here at the top behind the bolt, there's a rubber bushing, and that also needs to be in place and serviceable. Okay, earlier we told you that all trucks can be a little bit different. The truck that we're doing today had leaf springs on it, and we just went through that with the not missing, broken, cracked, bent. This truck here has an airbag on the front axle, and this is perfectly acceptable. We have our top mounting bracket, and down here I've got another metal mounting bracket, and in the middle is actually the airbag. Now I can use the same terminology here that I did with leaf springs, and I can say it is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. I also, because it's an airbag, I'm going to have to mention that it is not cut, not bulging, and not leaking. With our brake system, I've got this line. This is our brake line. I've also got a smaller line. This is for ABS. With the brake line, I'm going to say that the brake line is securely mounted, not cracked, cut, bulging, or leaking. This line will lead to this chamber. This round thing is a chamber. The chamber is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, missing, leaking, or rusted. There's a ring clamp. This ring that goes around right here. There's a ring clamp in place. From this, you'll see a rod that comes out, kind of like that. That's my push rod. And the push rod, this thing right here is a push rod, is connected to my slack adjuster. So this big hunk of iron right here, this is a slack adjuster. Okay, my slack adjuster is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, missing, and on a slack adjuster, it's got no more than 1 inch play. So what does that mean? 1 inch of play means that I should be able to grab the slack adjuster right here and pull it like that, and I have less than 1 inch of play. From my slack adjuster, I'm going to come into the inside of my drum, and we're going to talk about the brake lining, which is this right here. My brake lining is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. On a brake lining, you can have no petroleum products on the drum or the lining, and the lining needs to be at least 1/4 inch thick. Okay, so I told you earlier we were going to do this column A, column B, and column C, and we actually just finished column A. So to recap, we did the front of the vehicle, we did the engine compartment, we took care of the steering, the wheels, the front suspension, the brakes. All of this was column A. Now we're going to keep moving on, and we'll start with column B and do these things. Okay, so as we work our way down the side of the vehicle, I'm going to mention the door. The door is mounted to my hinge here. The door opens and closes properly. I've got a rubber seal that goes around the perimeter of the door. I can catch that. Opens and closes properly. The hinge is not cracked, bent, broken, or missing, and it works properly. We've got our mirror. We mentioned this in column A, but now we're in column B, so we're going to mention it again. The mirror is not cracked, broken, but it's properly adjusted and clean. Once we work our way from the mirror and the door, on this particular truck, we've got a battery box located right here. And so we've got batteries. Our batteries here. Batteries are securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. The wires are securely attached. They're not frayed, broken, or corroded. You'll find a battery box in different locations on different trucks. This one happens to be underneath the driver's step. They can be behind fuel tanks, they can be in between the frame rails, they can be on the other side of the truck, they can be in their own box altogether. So batteries, you'll find them in different places. As we work our way down the side of the truck, we've got the skirting covering our fuel tank. Because the fuel tank is behind here, we're going to take another shot and show you an actual fuel tank with straps. This truck here has got an exposed fuel tank. The truck that we're doing our pre-trip on actually has a fairing that covers this. On this particular truck, no fairing. So I've got this strap here and this strap here. They go around the fuel tank and hold it secure to the frame. I've got a fuel I've got a cap. The cap has a chain, and inside of the cap is a rubber seal. I need to mention those three things. These straps that hold the tank on, the chain that holds my safety chain for the cap, and the rubber seal inside the cap. And as I work my way further down the truck, I've got a catwalk and steps that will go up to my catwalk. They are securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. They must be free of grease, oil, and ice. And that completes our catwalk. Okay, so continuing on here with column B, we noticed when we read through column B that the next thing you're going to check is going to be lights and reflectors. Now we did lights earlier, but remember we only did the headlights, the high beams, the clearance, and the blinker lights on the truck. So what we want to be sure to do is check them on the back of the truck, and you could pick any time to do it. You could do the whole trailer or truck, back of the truck, front of the truck all at one time, but just be aware that you're going to need to do at least the lights on the back of the truck here in column B. So with that being said, the next item that we have is our drive line, and our drive line consists of U-joint here and the drive shaft itself, the big shaft, and we can come back to this U-joint, then through the differential to another U-joint, a short drive shaft, another U-joint, and the last differential. So that's our entire drive line. Now we do have to talk about the U-joint itself. So with the U-joint, it's securely mounted, tight, it's greased properly, and there's no foreign objects in here. With the drive shaft, very easy, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing. And for our drive line, that's going to be it. The next thing on our list of items is our exhaust. So the exhaust, of course, comes off the motor. You'll see a muffler down here, and then the pipe. So with the exhaust, it's not cracked, bent, broken, missing, it's not leaking, and there's no flammable material around it. Now just a side note, you probably noticed this truck is red. Well, this is not the truck that we originally started on. I've disconnected the truck and trailer we originally started on, and then realized that this truck here, our red one, actually showed our drive line better and the exhaust stack better. But this is an exhaust stack, and the one that we're working on today has what they call a weed burner exhaust, where the exhaust comes down and basically comes out right near the ground. We're going to show that to you, but for now, here's our exhaust stack. Okay, exhaust stack, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, missing, or leaking, and no flammable material around it. Okay, we just looked at an exhaust stack, and now I want to show you on the truck that we're actually doing our pre-trip with. This exhaust is a little bit harder to see. However, it's right here. There's an exhaust pipe right here. If I follow this back, it'll go all the way to the motor. So I've got an exhaust. This is what they call a weed burner exhaust. The other one, of course, was a stack. Now, since we're in this area, and while we finish up right here, we want to go over this, right? This big rail, the length of the truck. This is called the frame, okay? This is the frame, and when I talk about the frame, everything is mounted to it, so everything needs to be mounted securely to the frame. The frame itself, not cracked, bent, broken, or missing, and it's not cut or drilled, and there's no illegal welds on the frame. We're here at the rear of the truck, and what we're going to do is our brake components. But before we get to the brake components, I want to quick explain to you this whole axle assembly, the axle brakes, the airbags, the whole thing here. This is exactly the same as the forward axle. Okay, the two things are just identical. We're gonna film on this setup because we can get our camera in here, and clearly I would have to work around the fifth wheel and this up here if I was doing the forward axle. So, now that you know they're identical, let's get into what we're talking about. This piece right here, this rod, is called a torsion rod, okay? Connected from the rear end to the frame. I'm gonna say that it's securely mounted. It's not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And then on the end of it here, and on the other end of it, it's got rubber bushings. And I'm gonna have to say that these bushings are serviceable. I also want to mention on these torsion rods, they're different from truck to truck. Peterbilt has a certain way they do their suspension. Kenworth is different. A Mack might be different. A Freightliner might be different. So on this suspension for this particular Peterbilt, it runs like this. We're going to show you a picture of a Kenworth where the rods are actually, there's going forward and to the side. Just so you know they're different. Okay. I've got brake lines right here leading to this brake chamber right here. And you're going to notice this brake chamber is much bigger than the one that we did on the steer axle. I want to describe that to you quick. So the one up front on the steer axle is a service chamber. This one back here is an emergency chamber, and it's got a great big spring in here. Okay, you'll find this on drive axles, but you won't find it on a steer axle. So that's why the chamber is much bigger, okay? I got brake lines right here. I'm going to talk about these lines being securely mounted, not cracked, cut, bulging, or leaking. The lines go to the chamber, and the chamber is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. It's not leaking, and it's not rusted. Also, I'm going to make note of the ring clamp that runs around here. Right, ring clamp. And here is our slack adjuster. It is connected to the push rod coming out right here. I'm going to say that the slack adjuster has less than 1 inch of free play. And in order to check this properly, with our service chamber on the steer axle, I could just pull it. On an emergency chamber right now, spring pressure is holding the brakes on. What I need to do is chock my tires so my truck doesn't roll. If I wanted to check this properly, I need to apply air to the system, which will release my spring and allow me to pull on the slack adjuster and push rod. And so that's what we would have to do there, okay? From the slack adjuster, we'll come over to the brake lining, and I've got this lining right here, right? So I'm gonna say that this is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. There's no petroleum products on here, and it's at least 1/4 inch thick. Okay, so we've got our suspension components we're going to look at. See if I can come around. And this is an airbag. This big thing right here. This is a great view of an airbag. So trucks these days, and since about the early to mid 90s at least, have been riding on air suspension. Before that they were spring ride. So we've got big airbags here, and airbags, when you talk about them, need to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And with an airbag, you're going to have to say it's not damaged, cut, ripped, torn, leaking, or oil soaked. So this is our airbag right here. From the airbag, on the bottom you have a mount. You have a top mount here, and similar, you've got a bottom mount down here. You're going to talk about them being securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And this mount will mount to this big piece of iron right here that Peterbilt calls an assembly spring. They might be something different if you're doing a different truck. If you're doing a Kenworth, Freightliner, Mack, whatever, they might be different. Peterbilt likes to call this an assembly spring. So you're going to talk about your assembly spring and it's going to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and you won't have any of the leaves in here fanned out. If you had spring suspension, you would have a leaf spring suspension. We don't have any in our fleet. If you did, they would be stacked up several leaves high, maybe 10 or 12 leaves in there. Again, you would want to say the same thing. They're not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and the leaves aren't fanned out. Now, this assembly uses U-bolts right here, and the U-bolts attach the suspension assembly, the airbag and the spring assembly, to the actual axle. When you talk about U-bolts, they're going to be securely mounted and not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. Also, by the airbag, right over here, you've got a shock. Just like you did in the front, you're going to talk about your shock, and the shock is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. Because there's fluid in there, you're going to say it is not leaking or rusted. And you have rubber bushings, and the rubber bushings are in place. Here's our rubber bushing. Ours is actually getting a little weather checked. So here's our bushing. You would talk about that. Okay, we finished up with our suspension components in here along with our brakes. The next thing we're going to be looking at is our oil seal and the rim and tire and this general area out here. So, right behind here is an oil seal, and of course it's behind here so you can't see it. What we're going to check for is to make sure there is no leaking. If this seal was leaking, it would be all wet in this whole general area. It's a gear oil. You would probably be able to smell it, but you would definitely be able to see it. Your oil seal needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. There needs to be adequate oil and not leaking. From the oil seal, we already did the brakes, so we're going to look inside the rim. So our rim here is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. The rim is not warped, and there's no illegal welds. We're going to get up to the sidewall of the tire here. Now remember, these are drive tires, not steers. So drive tires, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or bulged. On the face of the tire, no foreign objects. It's got at least 2 30-seconds tread depth. Go to the inner sidewall here. We're going to talk about the sidewall, no foreign objects in this area. There are 2 kinds of tires, Dayton's and Buds. If you're in our class, we're gonna go much more into depth in this, but in this area, if these were old Dayton tires, there would be a spacer in here. It's about a 3-inch wide spacer that sits in here. It's round and keeps the rims separated. These are Bud wheels, and there is not a spacer like that between here. So for us, we've got 2 aluminum rims. You might have an aluminum and a steel or 2 steels. Either way, if they're Buds, there will be a small seal in here, a plastic seal just to keep these separated. What we're really going to look for is no foreign objects. I don't want to see anything in between these duals. You'll come up and do the the inner sidewall. This sidewall here, just like this one. Not cracked, bent, or bulged, no foreign objects. The face of the tire, at least 2 30-seconds tread depth. And the outer sidewall, not cracked, bent, or bulged, no foreign objects. You would get to this rim. This rim, same as the other, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, not warped. There's no illegal welds in here. I would get into my lug nuts. They all need to be present. They're securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, not loose and not rusted. We have a valve stem. Here's our valve stem. Our valve stem, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. The cap is in place. Okay, and to finish this up, right behind this is just a shiny hubcap. Behind our shiny hubcap is the axle, and we want to make sure this side of our oil seal is not leaking either. And that would conclude everything back here. Okay, to finish up the rear of the truck here, what we need to talk about are the splash guards right here. So you have one on each wheel. And these splash guards are going to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, or missing, just like everything else. They also aren't going to be ripped or torn, and they can't be touching the ground. Now, the lights, we should have checked lights earlier. So you'll have your running lights and brake lights and blinkers here. Also your reflectors here. And don't forget the reflective tape that goes on your splash guard right here. This is required. So you've got lights, reflectors, and splash guards. Also, I want to point out on the truck, we've got reflective tape up here and here. Here, 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 and over there. So that's our reflective tape. If you're following along on our sheet, the last thing that would be there is doors and lifts. Now, of course, this is a tractor. We don't have any doors and lifts on the tractor. If you have a truck that you're doing a pre-trip on and it has a door and a lift, like say a truck that hauls 55-gallon drums, that's the kind of lift that comes down, and then you put the drum on there and it comes back up, and then you put it in, then you close the doors. You would need to talk about your lift and your doors. Of course, with us, with this truck, no doors and lifts. Okay, we've done a bit of talking here about our brakes, our suspension system, and tires. What we haven't talked about yet is this fifth wheel and the whole, everything that encompasses our fifth wheel here. So let's get on to the fifth wheel. This big hunk of iron right here is called a fifth wheel. It's called, officially, it's a fifth wheel skid plate. We know it commonly as a fifth wheel, okay? The fifth wheel itself is going to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And then we're also going to say that this is properly lubricated. You can see in here are some locking jaws. Those are the jaws that are going to lock around the kingpin, and we're going to show you that. And you can see how these are around the kingpin. Now, from here, the fifth wheel skid plate is actually mounted to a fifth wheel platform, and that is this platform right here, okay? So the platform itself is this piece right here, and it is properly secured to the frame with these bolts. The bolts are not pointed down, they're straight out. Sometimes the bolts will be on top, they'll be pointed straight up and down. The fifth wheel platform, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. There's a pin right here. There's a pin just like that on the other side. So this is how the fifth wheel skid plate is actually mounted to the platform. This being the platform, and the platform bolted secure to the frame. We have on the fifth wheel, or just off of the fifth wheel, this release handle. This release handle does not have a safety latch on there, but we will show you a safety latch. Here's a fifth wheel with a safety latch on the release arm. You can see that just as a little tab that goes up and down. They're not very fancy, they just go over. When this release arm pops in, the safety latch will fall into this groove, and therefore it won't be able to come back out. Okay, here's our release handle. When it actuates, it's going to go in and lock. It needs to be locking and unlocking properly. Okay? This particular fifth wheel has these little ridges here. And this fifth wheel can slide. It can slide backwards or it can slide forwards, which would transfer weight, which is a whole nother class. But let's talk about the sliding aspect of it. I can flip a switch in the dash, would send air through this line and into this cylinder and pop this pin out. And there's a pin just like this on the other side of the truck. When these pins come out, I can slide the fifth wheel back and forth. And then of course I would flip my switch, these pins would go back in and lock properly in place. When we're talking about the sliding fifth wheel, it needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. It needs to be locked in place, and it needs to lock and unlock properly. Now, not every fifth wheel slides. Some of them are bolted securely in place with regular nuts and bolts, and we are going to show you that. Okay, before we hook up the truck to the trailer, there's a couple parts I want you to see before we get underneath here. One of these parts is the kingpin, and that's this large pin right here, sticking up and down from the trailer. We're gonna say this is not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and it's not welded. Also, the other thing that they talk about is the apron, and the apron is this big metal piece. It goes from side to side on the trailer and from about 3 or 4 feet back up to the front of the trailer. Okay, this whole thing here, this is what they're talking about when they say the apron. So the apron is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and there's no illegal welds on here. And we're gonna get to a point very soon where we talk about the gap. And we're going to talk about the gap between the fifth wheel and the apron. This, again, is our apron. Okay, so you were able to see the locking jaws wrapped fully around the kingpin and how that looks. The other thing I want to point out is our release handle. This is slid into the now locked position. Now the next thing we're going to look for, which I mentioned, remember I talked about the apron here. We don't want to have a gap in between the fifth wheel and the apron. Now for the video, we artificially put a gap in here. Okay, so that's what you don't want to have. And I'm going to go crank our landing gear and remove that gap. Okay, so I cranked our landing gear up and I got rid of our gap. Like I said, we artificially put a gap in between the fifth wheel and the apron, and now that gap is gone. And this is what we want, no gap in between here. So that completes our hooking up. Our locking jaws are locked around the kingpin. Our release handle here is in this secured position. There's no gap between the fifth wheel and the apron. That takes care of that. The next thing we have to do is talk about our 3 lines here. And we have an airline, 2 airlines, and an electrical line. So we can talk about why they're red and blue in a whole different video, but for now on our pre-trip video, what we're going to talk about is the airlines, the red and blue ones, need to be securely mounted, not cracked, cut, spliced, leaking, or touching anything except each other. Now, that's our lines, right? The line part of this, the end, these ends right here, these are called glad hands, okay? Glad hands need to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, not leaking, and the little black thing in here is a rubber grommet, okay? And that rubber grommet needs to be in place. The last one, our green one, this is an electrical line. So this is going to connect to our trailer, and it needs to be securely mounted and the cord not loose. I showed you the airlines. I want to show you there's glad hands right here that the airlines connect to. So one side of this, right, this glad hand will connect to that glad hand. This glad hand, the red one, will connect to this one. And my electrical line connects here. And I'm simply going to make sure all these connections are secure. And that'll complete our hookup. Okay, we're all hooked up. We've got our airing electrical lines hooked up here. The next thing that we're going to do is column C on our sheet. That column C starts with lights, so make sure that if you haven't done your lights yet, then now is your time to do your lights, but we should have done that already. That shouldn't be a concern. Okay, so what we start with here is this front of the trailer. Okay, and they call the front of the trailer a bulkhead. And what we want to do is, of course, just like everything else, it needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And the key thing here are the rivets. We're going to make sure all the rivets are in place. Okay, now on your sheet you're going to see where this is a bulkhead, and they're also going to say header board. And a header board is if you had a flatbed trailer and it had a front to it that stuck up about 4 feet, like to here, that would be your header board. Of course, for us, this is our bulkhead. Now, as we move down the trailer, I want to talk about our unibody frame and cross members. So we're going to need to get underneath the trailer to see that. But with a unibody frame, the one thing I want you to understand is there are no frame rails that run the length of the trailer, okay? This is like a unibody, this right here, okay? This metal stuff that goes all the way around the trailer. And underneath the trailer, when we get a picture of that, the cross members are going to go side to side. Just beyond the apron here, you can see all of these cross members are working themselves side to side. So there's no frame running the length, only cross members running side to side. Now what holds our cross members in place on the unibody are these rivets. Okay, so we need to inspect the unibody for all the rivets. Okay, see what I'm talking about? These rivets, all of them, all the way down the side of the trailer. Okay, so we made our way to the landing gear. This whole apparatus is what we call landing gear, okay? This bracket and the support arms, the arm that goes across or beam that goes across, and these legs, there's one here, there's one on the other side. When we talk about the landing gear, it needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. The legs need to move up and down together. So I cranked ours down just a couple of cranks, and you'll see how they go up and down, and how they operate together. Landing gear, the legs need to be all the way up, and when you finish cranking, the handle needs to be securely stowed in its carrying position. Okay, we're going to talk about sliding axle assembly. However, before we get to that, I need to mention something on your sheet. So your sheet says side rail. Well, what in the heck is a side rail? We've already defined this as being our subframe. Here's what a side rail is. There's different types of trailers. The trailer we're using for our pre-trip today is a van type trailer, but you know that there's van trailers, there's flatbed trailers, there's tanker trailers. Okay, so a side rail is something you would find on a flatbed trailer. There would be a rail that comes out a couple inches from the side of the trailer, and that is what would be called the side rail. So we don't have one on a van type trailer. You would have one if your pre-trip is on a flatbed. Okay. So with that being said, we're going to talk about the sliding axle assembly, and on our way back to the sliding axle assembly are these airlines. You can see they're mounted here, and then they kind of curl around and go up, and of course they'll make their way to the front of the trailer. These airlines, when we're talking about them, are going to be not cracked, not cut, not bulging, not leaking, and on these airlines, they must be at least 18 inches off the ground. Now, why would they even be springy like that? Why would they move around? And I'll tell you why. Because of this sliding axle assembly that we have right here. See this subframe and these holes? Our axles actually slide back and forth, and you can see all of the holes as we pan across. The axles will all go all the way to the back of the trailer if we wanted them to. Now, that's a whole nother video and a whole nother class, so we're not going to get into weight transfer and all of that stuff, but that's why you would have them doing that. So if I can have these axles slid all the way to the back, then the airline's got to follow it. That's why they're on the rail system that they're on, and that's why they got the spring, and that'll keep them tight as they go back. As you move them forward, and ours are set quite a bit forward, that spring takes up its tension and keeps these 18 inches off the ground. So our sliding axle assembly, I'm gonna say it's not cracked, bent, or broke. It has locking pins, and you can see our pins. Here's one pin right here. There's another one on the other side. And here's another pin right here. And there's another one on the other side. So you have a total of 4 pins holding this assembly in place. With the pins need to be locked and secure. And this arm right here, this is called a release arm. Our release arm needs to be in the locked position, which means locked means these pins are going to be sticking out of their holes, and they're in fact locked. So if I was going to slide my axles, I would pick this up, move it to this position here. That would suck our pins in, and I could slide my assembly backwards or forwards. While we're traveling down the road, this release arm needs to be in the locked position. I'm going to say it's locked and secure. Okay, here we are underneath the trailer. We're going to go through our suspension components. This trailer happens to be an air ride trailer, so we have an airbag. We have 4 of them actually, one on the forward axle up there, another one on the forward axle, and this one here. So with our airbags, just like the tractor, you know that airbags need to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, damaged, cut, ripped, torn, leaking, or oil soaked. Along with the airbag, we have a shock right over here, and our shock is going to be securely mounted, not cracked or bent, broken, missing. A shock has fluid in it, remember, so not leaking, not rusted. And on both ends, we'll get to that, there's rubber bushings. Oops. Okay, we showed you the suspension components underneath our trailer, which was an air ride trailer with the airbags and the shocks. On your sheet in column 3, you're going to see that there are leaf springs and U-bolts. Those would be indicative to a trailer that was a spring ride trailer. Ours, of course, is air ride, so if it were a spring ride, you would talk about the springs, and the springs would be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and then they would not be fanned out, okay? The same thing with the U-bolt. The U-bolt would hold the springs on, and the U-bolt not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. Okay, here we are underneath the trailer, and we're gonna get into our brake components. Now this whole mess of hoses here is all air hoses, and they all feed brake chambers, okay? So our hoses, when we talk about the hoses, are securely mounted, not cracked, cut, bulging, or leaking. The hoses go to chambers. Here's a chamber. There's one here. There's one on the other side over here. And of course on the front axle, I've got 2 more. So I think our best vantage point is this chamber here. When I talk about these chambers, I'm going to say that they are securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. They're not leaking or rusted. And there's a ring clamp. The ring clamp here is in place. From there, we're going to talk about the slack adjuster. And where's our best slack adjuster? Here.
That'll do.
Okay, we're going to talk about our slack adjuster. And slack adjuster is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. And of course it needs 1 inch of play. And in order to get 1 inch out of here, I'm going to need the wheels to be chalked because we have emergency brake chambers. So if my wheels are chalked and my air is applied to the trailer, I'm going to be able to grab my slack adjuster right here and pull it 1 inch or less. Okay, once we do the slack adjuster, the next thing we'll look at is our brake lining, which is right here. Brake lining needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. No petroleum products on the drum or the lining, and we need to have at least 1/4 inch of pad remaining. Now, since we're down here underneath the trailer, I also want to point out that we would have a hub oil seal right up in this area, and we want to make sure that oil seal is not leaking. So it would be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and it has an adequate an adequate level of oil, and it is not leaking. Okay, we finished up underneath the truck with our brake system. The last component we looked at was our inner oil seal. We need to do our rims and tires. So at this point, what we're going to talk about or start with is our inner rim inside here. And with my inner rim, I'm going to say it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. It's not warped, and there's no illegal welds. From the rim, from the inner rim, I've got the inside sidewall here. I'm going to talk about my sidewall and say it is not cracked, cut, or bulging. When I come across the face of my tire, I've got at least 2 30-second tread depth. And then again, on the inside of the sidewall here, not cracked, cut, or bulging. I'll talk about the space in between my 2 tires, no foreign objects. I've got another sidewall here, not cracked, cut, or bulged. The face of this tire, 2 30-second tread depth. And then the outer sidewall, not cracked, cut, or bulging. From that point, I'll come into my rim. I've got my outer rim here. It is securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, not warped, and there's no illegal welds here. I also need to talk about the lug nuts, that they are all in place and that they are secure. I'm going to talk about my valve stem, securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing. It has a cap in place, and it is adhered to the manufacturer's specifications. I also have an oil seal. This is my oil seal here. I'm going to make sure it's not leaking and that the cap here is in place. Now this whole axle assembly, we can use the exact same terms on this whole axle assembly. All the components are identical. In order to finish up on column C, the last thing we're going to do is the back end of the trailer here. And we're going to talk about the doors. The doors need to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, and they need to be functioning properly. That in conjunction with the hardware, right? We've got hardware here, latches, hinges, door handles, all of this hardware, all of this hardware, we need to mention. Not cracked, bent, broke, or missing, securely mounted. It all needs to work properly. We've got a thing called ties. These are ties. Okay, what they do is when you swing the door open, there's a little notch on the side of the trailer that this chain will hook into. So that's a tie that holds the door open properly. The other thing in this same section is a lift. Now, of course, we don't have a lift here, but if we did, if you're doing a pre-trip on a truck with a lift, it needs to be securely mounted and work properly. Okay, so I wanted to be sure to show you this is the part of the subframe here that our tie will hook into. That chain I showed you just a minute ago will hook into here. That'll hold our door open, and it needs to hold it open properly. The very last thing that we have on the back of the trailer is our splash guard. The splash guard needs to be securely mounted, not cracked, bent, broke, or ripped, not torn, and it cannot touch the ground. And that will conclude column C for us. We finished with column A, B, and C and our coupling, and the next thing we're going to do is our safety equipment and our in-cab portion of the pre-trip. So a part of our safety equipment is located in the side box here. You can see this is our side box to this truck. I've got a fire extinguisher. I need to say that it is securely mounted and it's properly charged. All right, we're in the green level there. I've also got a red box here. This red box has got 3 reflective triangles in it. Okay, there's 3 of these. They come out, they turn, and we can set them up. So I've got my 3 reflective triangles. Get it in there. The third safety item that we have is extra fuses. For us at our school, we keep them in our accident kits here in the driver's door. Every truck has got extra fuses. Here's one of them. There's several in here. I've got about 6 of them in there, but a fuse looks like that. Okay, beyond our fire extinguisher, our triangles, and our fuses, I've also got a seat belt inside the truck here. The seat belt needs to be securely mounted. You can see it's mounted here on the floor. There's another belt like that on the other side, securely mounted here and securely mounted up on the shoulder up here. The seat belt needs to be not cut, not ripped, and not frayed. And that's our safety equipment. Okay, we're going to do the in-cab portion of the pre-trip here. The first thing I'm going to do is what they call a safe start. So I want to make sure that my transmission is in neutral, which it is. I'm then going to depress the clutch all the way to the floor, and then I'm going to turn the key and let the truck cycle, and then I will start the truck. Now, the reason I didn't do that quite yet is we've got a couple things that are going to happen all at once here. I need to, on this display screen, is going to be the ABS lights. My ABS lights, when I turn the truck on, are going to come on and then they're going to go off. If they stayed on, that would mean that I had a problem. So again, we want them to come on and then go off right away. So, safe start. Here we are. Truck's in neutral, clutch to the floor. We're going to let it cycle. Okay, I can turn it on. There's my ABS lights. They came on, they went off. I'm going to slowly release the clutch, and there we go. So now we're started. Okay, the next thing we're going to do then is take a look at our gauges. And this truck has a fairly basic package for gauges. Right here I've got my oil pressure. I need to say it's working properly and rises to the operating range. My next one is my temperature gauge, again working properly and rises to the operating range. The next one up here is my volts. This is working properly and rises to between 12 and 14 volts. From there, I've got 2 air gauges right here. This truck has 2 air gauges. I do want to point out that some trucks have 1 gauge with 2 needles. This has 2 gauges. You'll see on there it says primary air and secondary air. My air gauges need to be working properly and rise to 120 psi. The next thing I'm going to look for is my lighting indicators. I need to look for my left hand blinking indicator, my right hand blinking indicator, my 4-ways, and my high beams. Okay, once those are done, I can move over to my defroster. I need to ensure that my defroster works in all of the fan speeds. I also need to ensure that the heat works in all of the fan speeds. I'm going to take a look around at my glass and mirrors. All of my glass and mirrors need to be clean and properly adjusted, not broken. I'll do my windshield wipers. They need to function. Okay. I also need to check my windshield washer fluid. From there I can check my horns. I've got a city horn right here on the steering wheel. I've also got an air horn up here. Okay, so we did our interior portion of the pre-trip. The very last thing we need to do is our brake test. So here are my valves for the air brakes. This is my trailer air supply valve. This is my truck air supply valve. First thing I'll do is push this in, supplying air to the trailer. I'm going to attempt to pull the truck ahead and do a tug test. So I place the vehicle in first gear, attempt to pull ahead. The vehicle does not move. That means that our spring brakes are working on the truck. I'm going to reverse that, supply air to the truck, and now our spring brake should hold us on the trailer. I'm going to place the vehicle in first gear again, attempt to pull ahead. Performing that tug test, I cannot pull ahead. That's exactly the way that's supposed to work. Now, at the same time you did that, do not forget that you also did a tug test between the truck and trailer, ensuring the locking jaws were locked around the kingpin of the trailer. Okay, now I can set the brakes on the truck and the trailer, and so I'm going to shut the truck off. I'm going to turn the key back to the accessory position. And for the next portion of the test, I need to ensure that I've got at least 105 pounds of air pressure, which I do. Okay, after I ensure that I have that much air pressure, I'm going to apply my brakes, both of them together. I should have no more than a 10 to 15 pound initial pressure loss. Once I have the initial pressure loss, I'm going to keep an eye on my gauges and make sure that I have no more than a 3 pound pressure loss. I'm going to time that for 1 minute. So for purposes of the video, our 1 minute is up. I can see I have not lost any air pressure. The next thing I'm going to do is apply my foot brake for 1 minute. At this point, I cannot lose more than 4 pounds of pressure. So our 1 minute is up. I have not lost any air pressure. At this point, I'm going to fan the brakes. I'm going to fan them down until my until my buzzer or lights come on. On this truck, it's going to be a light inside the gauge, and they need to come on. My lights need to come on at 60 pounds. So I'm pumping. There we are, 60 pounds, 60 pounds. There's my lights. I'm going to continue to fan my brakes, and my 2 air supply valves are going to pop out between 40 and 20 pounds. And there we are. Now with both buttons out, I'm going to start the truck, and the first thing I'm going to do is attempt to pull ahead before I build any air pressure. Okay. Safe start. Place the vehicle in first gear. Attempt to pull ahead and do a tug test. I cannot move. That's my final tug test. Okay, now the last thing I'm going to do. We're inside a building, so I can't do this. I'm simply going to talk you through it. The last thing we'll do is place the vehicle in gear. We're going to pull ahead about 5 miles an hour. I'm going to press my foot on the brake. The vehicle should come to a complete stop, smooth. It should not pull to the left or to the right. Once that's completed, I'm going to leave the truck in gear. We are then going to start the driving portion of the test. Okay, so we completed an entire pre-trip on this truck and trailer and the interior. Now, this video is just over an hour long. I want you to know that you got about 45 minutes to do your actual pre-trip. Now, we really went over things, we went in depth on several things, but be cognizant of your time. You really need to move this along and kind of have her down by the time you get there. Another thing that I wanted to point out is you probably noticed we didn't hit everything. We didn't hit things like the turbo, we didn't do the crossmembers, we didn't do the front axle, we didn't do the fuel gauge, the speedometer, or the tachometer. There were many things on the truck that we simply didn't talk about. We could have, and you should take a look at all of those things. However, the reason we didn't mention that is because they're not officially on the pre-trip that you are going to do for the state, at least not in the state of Minnesota. Like I said, I've seen differences between states, I've seen differences between exam stations, I've even seen differences between examiners at the same exam station. So although they're very, very close, they're not always the same. Be sure you're familiar with with the exam station you're going to visit. So that's all I've got. Thank you for watching our video. I appreciate it. We're going to have more. This is our first. Thanks again for checking us out.
Thanks to what I've learned, you can literally pick from the job that you want.
Visit alextech.edu.